Hi everyone, welcome back to Farsight's Biotech and Health Extension Strategy Group. I'm really looking forward to spending much time with you again this year, even if virtually only for now. But this year we hoping that we can pick it up where we left it off in 2020, but then also pick up the pace and perhaps do a little bit more action focused opportunities for collaboration. So I will quickly walk you through the program for this year, and we'll be meeting every second Thursday of the month as kind of like our touch point, our anchor point. And then from there, we're going to spin out hopefully, a lot of meetings that that I invite you to propose. So if you have specific focus areas that you want this group to explore, then please let me know, and then I'll make sure they get on the program. So we're going to have a little bit more decentralized, community-oriented programming this year, and a little bit more action-oriented programming too, which is what I'm going to hopefully show you now. Okay, so here you see our program for this year. In a nutshell, really, what we are going to do this year is, for the first half of 2021, we are going to try to really evaluate and look at a few key areas for progress and aging, and then based on that, hopefully spin out a few ideas for progress that we can as a community tackle together. That is what the second half of 2021 is reserved for. And so hopefully in the first one, we kind of get down really what the major multipliers for progress are. And in the second half, we hopefully try to make some progress and create some prototypes. All right, so I'll quickly walk you through the bits that you can expect. We are in the session right now, re-meeting group members and defining goals. And then in February, we're going to tackle industry blind spots, so specifically what work is not being incentivized right now that could dramatically advance progress on aging in industry. Then the same thing for research. We're going to ask the same question here, but with different fantastic folks. In March, we're going to have a focus area on clinical trials and analytics, but with James Kirkland, who was here last year, and with the meeting that many of you really liked. And so hopefully we can continue the discussion on what kind of needs to happen on clinical trials. Then in April, I'm super happy to have Ronald Kowansky here, and who will be discussing what can happen on an NIA level, really, and an institutional perspective on biggest multipliers for change. In April, we're going to discuss biomarker development for FDA-recognized diseases. And then we're going to start with specific focus areas where we thought that they may be particularly promising for getting work done and for actually making progress right now. One of them is platforms, tools, and data analysis for long-term progress on aging. One is biomarker and aging clock development. And then one is biomarker standardization for progress on aging. And then we have a final one, and this is in August, on regenerative medicine. So this is kind of like the program for the first half of the year. And then from there, we're going to spin out, hopefully, a little bit more decentralized kind of focus groups that maybe focus on specific opportunities in each of those areas, and see if we can make progress on those. And then we gather again in December and see if actually if we're able to hack together a little prototype. So there's a few different things that I'm hoping for this group really to achieve there. Of course, one of them is that we continue just forming a really strong ecosystem and community together. The other one would be that we actually get a document together based on our meetings, and I'll be taking care of that together with Bolek, who's here, on specific areas that we think that other folks should also be taking upon them. And so trying to form more of a wider coalition with specific action items for those people who are interested in helping. So that could be on all kinds of different levels, just trying to get together kind of like an action plan with different bullets that different folks could take on if they're interested in helping. And then lastly, of course, hoping to get together actually a few prototypes of what solutions could look like if we got it right. And so for those, we may even have the opportunity to have some initial funding and definitely some community support and mentorship from folks in this group. And for that, we're hoping to really kind of like grow a strong base and more of a focused kind of like, yeah, more a focus on the members here and how we can help each other grow an ecosystem really from the bottom up. And so for that, we have a membership form that I'm hoping many of you will fill out. Yeah, but with that, thank you very, very much for joining again. I'm really, really happy to have Sonia Arrison here. Sonia will be discussing a few of the group goals that we may have today based on the form that I sent out to many of you. So please answer the form, that will hopefully give us a little bit more of a really structured way of assessing how each and every one of us can help each other more. For now, I'm very happy to welcome Sonia to be discussing the questions that hopefully I get to hear from you on the form and that we were discussing next time. From there, we're going to launch into a broader discussion on what kind of goals could this group take on in the next year, and then we'll get more specific in the next month. All right, thank you very much and welcome, Sonia. It's really, really good to have you here.
Yeah, so I was just saying that, you know, we were really hoping to push this group a little bit further. And, you know, not only talking about interesting things in the longevity space, but actually sort of having more of a targeted goal where we say, okay, let's identify some of the key bottlenecks and the key stumbling blocks in the longevity space. And let's spend part of the year doing that. And then let's spend the second part of the year trying to figure out if we can be nimble. I mean, this is an incredible group of people. If we can be nimble and all get together and kind of think about how we might build teams to go after fixing those goals. And, you know, if we can build a team quickly, maybe we can also help get funding for it quickly. And maybe we can actually, you know, do something here, like actually have an impact. It's not just an interesting salon. And, you know, it is an interesting salon and there's great talks and all of that, but it'd be nice to actually do something as well.
Exactly. So we're working behind the scenes, and we have Bolek here, who's our note taker. So we have a collaborative note taking tool, and so we're hoping to hear from all of you. He'll be tracking most of the things that we discuss in the group, and then hopefully, I mean, the minimum I think fruit for me is really just having a really structured kind of like doc on which everything that you know, this community agrees on that would be valuable to do and would be valuable to take on by different actors is in one place in a nicely in a nicely formatted way, so we can share that. Second thing, of course, what Sonia said is, you know, actually trying to get something together and trying to collaborate on projects together. And are there specific areas, Sonia, that you're particularly interested in looking into or that you want to draw our attention to already?
Well, there's so many areas that I'm interested in. You know, recently I've been spending a lot of time looking at the brain, which has not been an area of focus for me in the past because it's been so difficult to get data on the brain, but there's been a lot of advances in brain technology recently. You know, optogenetics, of course, but brain organoid work and that kind of and other things related to it. So I think this is going to be the year of the brain. So which is about time. It's about time for that, isn't it? Because we can't live very long if our brain's not working well. So yeah. I'm interested in that, but I'm interested in a lot of things, and I'm super excited to hear about one of our fellows who's, well, both of them actually sound like they have a connection with AI, because, you know, one of the things I spend a lot of time listening to pitches. I'm spending all my time these days investing in companies, and I'm mostly focused on longevity companies, but I get pitched on other companies too, because I'm working with some other VC firms, and you know, all the non-bio, I would almost say that every single non-biotech tech company that I meet is using AI, but not every single biotech company I meet is using AI. And I think that needs to change, because biotech needs the AI more than the non-biotech companies need it. So I would like to see more of a focus on that. I don't know what to extent we can have an impact on that, but I think we should all be pushing for more. Not that AI is a goal in itself, but it's a tool, and I think it's a tool that biotech has been slightly slower to pick up, at least recently, and it's hard.
Yeah, I'm glad that we have quite a strong program on that particular issue. But would you also say that there's particular things which people are maybe focusing on too much right now? Or like, do you think there's anything that's particularly overrated or underrated at the moment?
I've always felt that maybe people will disagree with me, but I always felt that senolytics was really overrated. There was so much hype around it, and not much has really come of it. And maybe something will come of it still. And it's not that we should stop looking at senolytics, but I feel like that was really, really overhyped. And I think there's other areas to be focusing on as well. And and then that gets into the whole the whole debate, as Aubrey often brings us up, with the split between the, are you looking for a health extending technology that's systemic, or something that's you're repairing things on a piece by piece basis kind of thing? And the senolytics were systemic, and maybe that's why we all got excited about it, because it's like, wouldn't it be nice if there was a silver bullet and boom, we just don't age as much anymore. So you can see how
we'll have a few specific sessions as well on regenerative technologies later in the year. But I think I already have a question here from the audience, which is, what is your time frame for results on anti-aging therapeutics?
What is my time frame as an investor? Or, I mean, as an investor, I have to make money, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not investing in companies that are research projects, or at least I'm trying not to do that. Sometimes it's hard to know, which is why, by the way, I'm super excited to have this group. And I sort of wish we could meet in person, and maybe we will in the not too distant future, but I would love to sort of get to know many of you better, because the more experts in different fields I can meet, the better it is for me. If there's something that, I see and I'm like, well, for instance, I saw a nanotech company a few months ago, and I was able to send it to one of our Foresight fellows who's a nanotech expert, and he gave me some great advice on it. And so I would love to be able to meet many of you in person, just to be able to go back and forth on different things like that.
Yeah, we're hoping in the meantime to set up more of a virtual community membership profile, at least, so people can reach out to each other. But Ronald, do you want to provide some clarity on the question that you asked? Because Ronald was the one who just asked the question, and perhaps a little bit on your background too, so Sonia can gauge.
Oh, okay. I work at the National Institute on Aging, and I am the director for the Division of Aging Biology. So, and NIA is supporting some clinical studies with senolytics in relationship to COVID-19, for example. So I'm not agreeing or disagreeing about the hype or overhype on senolytics, but I am curious to know, how quickly do you need to have a result before you think it's worthwhile, to make a judgment as to whether it's worthwhile or not?
Right. Yes. No. Okay. Now I see what you're saying. The reason I think it was overhyped is because people were expecting a result sooner than it came. People kept saying that there was going to be a result, and that was actually the overhype. I think that you're quite right that what you're implying is that senolytics may very well pay off, and it just might take some time. And so, yeah, I mean, my timeline is very long. I'm trying to get more time so that I can have a much longer horizon to watch things.
I'm older than you, so my timeline is by definition shorter.
Well, hopefully that will change.
But he's older, but he is now formally and going forward the head of the Biology of Aging division. So congratulations, Ron. I don't know if people realize that.
Thanks. That wasn't the point.
Perfect.
I want to make another point that is always interesting for me. We have different languages, and they don't make the same sense to us. When you say hype of the senolytic, you are talking about what happened in the business arena.
That's right. Yes.
We have no proof of concept on any drug that's working in human, right? I mean, that's part of our problem. So we have to distinguish between, because I think there are better promises and less better promises, but I understand now where you're coming from.
Yes, that's a very good point, Nir. We exactly. I was talking about it from a business perspective.
All right, thank you. Well, we have a comment from Aubrey as well. just chime in.
Sure, thank you. So first of all, to Ron, yeah, I am so happy about this. I was genuinely fearing that Ron would be regarded by the decision makers as altogether too enlightened for this job. So that hasn't happened, so that's fantastic.
Could we leave me alone, please? Thank you.
All right, so yes, so what I was going to ask Sonia, and of course the rest of the group, was with regard to how we can continue to make even further progress on what I view as the single biggest thing that we did last year. The biggest thing that we did last year, in my view, is to bring together such a large number of really powerful people in both the science and the policy. I'm not sure can someone say whether I'm being heard? Everyone has frozen on me.
Yeah.
Yes, I hear you well.
Good. Yeah, on science and policy and regulation and even government, of course. So the thing is, can we do even more in that regard? At the end of the day, in order to have real impact, as we deserve to have, given the talent and knowledge here, we need to go further. We need to get the attention of, we need to get Anthony Fauci speaking at this group. We need to get, Joe Biden listening, things like that, and I feel that the rate of progress we have made so far has been so impressive that we should be aiming high in that regard. We should not see any limits to whose attention we can get. So I want to, from everybody, especially Sonia first, how we might go about that.
Well, I think it all depends on what kind of attention we want to, Aubrey. Maybe you're saying we want Joe Biden because we want him to be interested in aging, and then maybe the government will fund aging, and maybe the FDA will recognize aging, and that would be a big win. Yeah, I think we have to be careful about what our goals are and what we're trying to do. What do you think, Allison? You're the one who, and by the way, I just want to give even more credit to Allison because she's done such a great job, and this really wouldn't have happened without her. So thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely, if I'm trying to do anything, then it's hurting the cats. But I think in terms of the government question, I also want to ask Larry Callahan, who just raised his hand. Larry, you found out how to raise your hand, and perhaps say like a word or two from where you're coming to from this angle, and then perhaps you want to speak specifically on
yeah, thanks, Allison. I know how to learn. I raised my hand on Zoom, and I really attribute that to this Zoom group. So otherwise, I just speak randomly. But I think one of the big problems, I don't know how many of you get a chance. I sent Allison something about the CERC meeting about regulatory affairs, and Janet Woodcock, who's the director of CEDAR, gave a talk there, and she made a good point, but it was really bad. That of all the clinical trials that we've done for COVID for therapeutics, we have no information other than hydroxychloroquine doesn't work, and all the other interventions may work slightly, at least. So I think the thing that has to happen is we have to think of new ways to do clinical trials to make a lot of patients involved in them. Even and I think for longevity, that's a big issue too. And the one of the ways to do it, like we can't. Everybody talks about real world evidence, but the real world data is so bad that you can't use it really. People who have tried to do that stuff. So a lot of it is trying to include this thing and trying to get one of the things, and I know Keith has mentioned that too, is, we have to have personal healthcare records, where all your healthcare records are aggregated somewhere. And, there needs to be some lobbying for that. And that maybe we'll be able to figure out from that, do real world evidence and figure out why some people are living a lot longer and have greater health spans than others. Other countries are doing that, and maybe we can take advantage of that too. But I think the whole nature of clinical trials, like I did some work in HIV research, and the reason why it became so successful because there was a lot of coordination in between, later on. It took us a long time to learn to do that, so that different companies' drugs would get in there and try them. And I think it's a tragedy that we weren't ready for something like that off the block for COVID. In fact, when we give EUAs, it's been a disaster for therapeutics. When we gave an EUA to hydroxychloroquine, everybody around the world started to use it. We had absolutely no data that it was effective. It was just totally theoretical. In fact, we had data it wasn't effective at the time. And we still went ahead and gave an EUA, and we, tons of patients got treated with it, and, they had no benefit from it. And I think that's why we have to be careful and really capture information, try to get better targeted and powered studies so that you can really get real information. I think it will take a whole overhaul of the whole clinical trial industry, where it's much more coordinated and much more regulated, in a sense that we just can't allow clinical trials. You're putting patients at risk and wasting their time and everything else in their lives. Sometimes you have to really run a more coordinated, effective clinical trial network in a global sense.
Well, Larry, like one idea that we came up with in the last years, actually, if this group could put together something like a first prototype of where we share both data in an openly accessible way, but also where perhaps folks could be doing more like early research that could then serve as prototypes for what could then be served for a foundation for establishing trials there. But do you think that has any chance of ever being recognized by the FDA? Like, do you think that this group doing some kind of groundwork in that regard does have any impact on that at all? Like, yeah.
Would it be useful to?
Well, I mean, you've had some reports on aging. I mean, biomarkers. We don't validate many biomarkers, and maybe we should. I think, there's the metformin that Mills or whatever his name is doing right now. And the FDA, aging isn't particularly not considered a disease. And the statute doesn't really say it has to be a disease. It says, you affect the physiology of the body, and certainly aging is that. It's just, how do you measure it? How do you measure health span and things like that? But I don't think there's a big reluctance. I mean, there's a lot of aging reviewers at FDA, and I'm sure they would want to see things that improve their health span. And if we can get good data to show that, I mean, the blue zone data stuff around the world that some people are helping them, but that's the thing, is to get good clinical data that shows that taking rosemary every day helps, or there's a lot of things that out there that people claim help, and to really get solid clinical data. That's the thing that we don't have on a lot of things. We don't have it really on COVID for therapeutics yet. Yeah. There's a lot of protocols, the IMANS protocol that may work, and but we don't have good clinical data, and it's a real tragedy. We certainly have enough patients.
Yeah, that's true. And we are having a few meetings later this year where we're going to talk about biomarker standardization and how we can use them better as metrics. And then thanks to you, of course, we have someone from the FDA as well speak to us about how they at least handle those biomarkers for FDA-approved diseases. So thanks for that. And we're hoping that we can tackle that problem. But Sonia, did you want to react to it? And then we have Bernal Siegel with a comment from the chat.
Yeah, I was just thinking that maybe it might make sense if it were easy for us to put together sort of a top 10 list of like the top 10 things the government could do to help longevity science move along, right? Like helping to establish a record system where researchers could use anonymous data or something, or if we have some interesting, or maybe just top 5 things the FDA could recognize aging, for instance. We maybe some kind of top list that we could circulate, and at least that's something.
Well, one idea would also be putting together a top list, and then below that, what different actors could do to make that happen. Because recognizing aging as a disease, like that involves probably a lot of different people doing a lot of different things. So, then different people, depending on who they are, could then pick a little piece of the puzzle. But Bernard, did you want to say something, or Tom? I know that you're commenting on the chat. Bernard?
Yes, I was on mute, so I can't restrain myself from making chat comments to this. I really am glad that I joined, and I welcome this group. It's tremendously. My work is involved with Regenerative Medicine Foundation, but it's also moving the needle on regulatory and general policies related to some of the technologies and the enabling technologies that are needed for, as Aubrey puts it, to advance the longevity crusade. So my comment was to, my latest comment was to the individual that said, well, how is this like ACT UP? And this is, aging in general is not viewed in an idea of a pandemic, right? It's AARP. And that's not going to get anything done other than getting us car insurance. So I'm looking to see ways that we can align this really meritorious movement that you're creating with the other groups and multitude of medical philanthropies and disease groups and align ourselves with that towards the same goal. Largely, these cutting edge technologies needs a streamlining of FDA regulation, and not only in the United States, but around the world. So how can these things align? I perceive the longevity movement as really almost a spear point of the future, right? And as this gains momentum, is going to be very welcome in the community. So I should be listening. I didn't mean to even interject myself. I have to be in more listening mode in 2021, but I can't help myself.
What do you think for regenerative medicine, at least, is the number one perhaps push factor there?
Well, certainly COVID has related opportunities for regenerative medicine, MSc trials, for example, for COVID-related ARDS. And there is big progress with that. Even a recent trial that was reported out of the University of Miami. And there's a realization in that community that the FDA is, for the field of stem cells, demanding large-scale clinical trials, randomized. If we're going to have to go through that total process to get cell therapies approved, it's going to be a very, very heavy lift. So real world evidence, building outcomes databases, using AI, certainly, and recognizing that industry and all the enabling technologies have the biggest stake in it, and bringing in those industry factors. And as Sonia said, the investor community is also leading the way. But it's like a giant tossed salad. If we all have all the separate ingredients in the little jars, we've got to mix them together. And that's what gets me so pleased about this group, which is at a very high intellectual spear point. But that makes it hard for the common people that live in my communities in Palm Beach to sometimes understand the vision. But we can really get this done, I think.
Yeah, thanks. Sonia, do you want to react to that? Or?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I have to say that I was a little taken aback by Nir's comment earlier, although I believe you, that some people just, they don't think about aging as something that we might be able to tackle. And they haven't even heard of your trial. I mean, what? That is shocking to me. And so, yeah, we need to do more. Maybe I should start writing a little bit more again. I should take some of my time away from investing and start writing some more. But I was thinking the other day how, every day the newspapers are publishing counts of how many people have died from COVID. And I thought, could you imagine if we lived in a world where they published every day the counts that how many people died from cancer today? How many people died from Alzheimer's today? How many people died from the diseases of aging today? Everybody would be freaking out, right? I mean, the numbers would be gigantic. So yeah. I think this is an opportunity in time for us to ride that wave, for sure.
Would it be great if everyone was freaking out?
Well, it'd be great if they were willing to do something about it. We don't want them just randomly freaking out. We've seen that freaking out people can put their energies to the wrong places sometimes. But
I remember when we started this group last year, and Aubrey said right at the beginning something like, we can't miss the boat on this one. We have to make clear that the COVID and aging correlation, or like the relationships between them, are so strong. And so I'm really curious, do you think, and does the group think this has been done enough, or do you think people are kind of totally missing the relationship? Because many people that I speak to, they still think that a lot of young people die, and so I wonder whether we missed the boat or whether there's still something right now that one can do.
I think we have sort of missed the boat. I mean, it's crazy too, because even just reading the news articles where they're saying, okay, now the government says the vaccine should be distributed on an age-based basis. Well, yes, right? I mean, there's an age component to this. They're only sort of realizing this now from the authorities. I think that everybody is so scared, and there have been all these very high-profile news articles about young people getting it and like children getting this odd rare disease when, and that's kind of obscured the fact that that is linked to age very, very tightly.
Yeah, thanks. I think Aubrey has a comment on that too.
Yeah, I want to slightly disagree with Sonia's answer just now. I would say that no, we have definitely not missed that boat yet, because the key thing that tells me when the boat is going to leave the station, so to speak, is when the top policymakers and decision makers start to shift their attention from the pandemic to the next pandemic, the prevention of the next pandemic and the minimization, which has not happened yet. So I've been trying to refine my own language here. Obviously, I'm the kind of person who's best at being a provocateur rather than a diplomat. And so I have been finding ways to do that. And one thing that I've started to say very loudly, which I was not saying when I first brought this comment up to the group, is that it's highly likely that in the long run, COVID will actually save far more lives than it claims, which is a nice soundbite. But of course, what I mean by it is that the consequences of COVID down the road will be to accelerate and focus people's minds, decision makers' minds, on what we can do to prevent the health problems and suffering, and of course, the economic catastrophe associated with things like this. We obviously know that if we could rejuvenate and indeed maintain the youth of the immune system, COVID would be very much less of a problem. And that also applies, obviously, in spades to future pandemics. So that's the kind of logic and the kind of language that I'm at right now.
Thanks. Nir, do you want to?
Yeah, I totally second Aubrey. Aubrey, it's always amazing how much we agree. It's almost the same language. We never were talking about the opportunity on aging that was specific for COVID. It was specific for any future epidemic too. It's how do we rejuvenate the immune response and prepare the body to deal with infection when you're old. But another reason that we're not done is that unlike what you think you know about this immunization is not going to work in the elderly the same way. And I'm carefully reading the New England Journal of Medicine and every paper that's coming on, because remember that the machinery that this mRNA is using is the machinery that also fails with aging. So it's true that it's effective in elderly, but those elderly have no other medical conditions. So those are biologically young elderly. I don't see that this immunization is effective. I hope it is, but let's be prepared, because you'll start seeing that the elderly still get COVID after this immunization. By the way, if I'm wrong, there's something we don't understand in the biology of aging of how this mRNA can get over everything. But I predict that you'll find out that it's not as effective. And it's again a way for us to say, yeah, let's fix the immunosenescence and we'll do better for this and for the next epidemic.
So maybe we get a second vote. Tom, did you want to chime in as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to say a little bit about what are different strategies to go from ideas to something happening in the world. And I think it's useful to distinguish between those things that can happen more or less organically, because they are things that happen between mutually consenting adults. So a canonical example of that would be an entrepreneur has a great idea. She pitches Sonia, and Sonia decides to write a check for a seed investment, right? So that's something that is sort of can happen organically in a bottom-up fashion between mutually consenting adults. I think that there are other things that, for example, changes in policy that may not happen organically and that require a more concerted effort. So the questions that I'm always interested in are, number one, where are we today as of early 2021? Number two, where would we like to be over the short, medium, and long term? And then finally, what are the public and private actions that would allow us to achieve those goals, or at least begin to move in the right direction? Most complex problems require building a coalition. So it's not the type of thing that one individual is going to be able to solve by themselves. And it's very difficult to build a coalition if you can't do two things at a minimum. Number one, identify the members of the coalition. And number two, identify the mutually reinforcing steps that you want them to take in the form A does B, so C. So for example, on the government side, that might be a good start would be the NIH, the FNIH, which is an arm of the NIH that can engage in public-private partnerships and does things like runs the biomarkers consortium, and the FDA. So I would say on the government side that those would be three organizations to focus on. So for example, you could say the NIA should have an increase in its top line that is not specifically allocated to Alzheimer's, so that it can fund additional work in both fundamental and translational geroscience. That's an example of what I'm talking about. And then you could say, all right, well, what has to happen in order for that to occur? And if anyone's interested, I can sort of tell you, because that my job was on something like the Brain Initiative was to get NIH, DARPA, IARPA, the National Science Foundation, additional funding to try to do for neuroscience what the Genome Project did for genetics. So I can tell you literally what are all the steps and who are all the people who need to say yes. And if you're on the outside, what are the things that you can do to make it as easy as possible for that to occur? You can imagine roles for philanthropy. So if you were a billionaire and you were interested in this, what are the things that you would fund? If you are a venture capitalist and you wanted to issue something like the Y Combinator request for startups, where they say, these are all the startups that we would like to see. What would be on your list? So what is the coalition of the willing and able that needs to come together? How can you define with some level of specificity what it is that you want those individuals and organizations to do? And how do you make it falling off a log easy for them? How do you make it as easy as possible for them to do that? So for example, if I wanted my boss to do something, I wouldn't say, I have a problem and I would like you to solve your problem, you to solve my problem for me. I would say, I want you to send the following email to this member of the cabinet, right? So anyway, that's everyone that has their own sort of perspective on how change happens in the world. But one way in which it happens is that there's a group of people has articulated a coherent relationship between ends and means, and they can answer the what, how, who, and why from the kind of very high general level bumper sticker to the sort of more specific implementation strategy that is required to make success. So I put in the chat an example of the computer science research community has a mechanism for continually refreshing the computer science research agenda, but nothing like that exists for the aging community. So there's one person I can call, and he can mobilize the best, some of the top researchers in the country to say, what are the most important and exciting research challenges in the field of computer science, and get me a set of 5 to 10 page white papers that articulate what those are on both core fundamental CS topics, but then computer science applied to particular societal challenges like the pandemic.
Yeah, that would be a valuable, I think, pursuit to do for aging. Sonia, do you want to react to that?
Well, I was just going to say, I nominate Tom to put together a list for us of what we should do, a sort of a draft list that we can all go over and discuss and think about how we can start moving the needle. Because no one's
Well,
done that.
congratulations.
Or we could come up with a list for Tom to make it really easy for him to then get the step that we need from him.
Right. Well, then, or we could put together the list, and then he could tell us if it makes any sense from his.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to send you the sort of what I've heard so far, just from asking people this question. And I wouldn't say that there's unanimity. I think it's a classic, three blind people and the elephant with everyone. Everyone has a tendency to believe whatever they're working on is the most important part of the of the problem. But there's certain things that I hear fairly consistently as being important.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to know that, because we'll be going through like industry research and so forth, like in the upcoming month, like in the individual meetings. So I think it would be useful if you have specific questions that you think we should be tackling with those people in those specifically focused sessions. And, I think we are also trying to do it kind of from both ways. One, we're going to talk about like individual, like really on each level, what could people do? But then also I think just by doing this and going through the process, we're hoping to build kind of like a community also bottom up of folks that, already kind of like are interested in supporting each other and helping each other. And so I think what we will maybe be doing more of maybe like more of an entrepreneurial network or something, but like meanwhile tackling I think the questions on different levels. So hopefully we can kind of like we can create like a proof of concept in this community that a larger coalition could work. Okay, we have David, Gobel, Lynne Cox, but before that, Creon had his hand up for a long time.
Oh,
Creon, do you want to go first? Yes.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. This is a question. I kind of look like we've got the three different institutional types represented in our quote unquote panel. So we've got Sonia and Aubrey kind of representing industry, if you will, and capital. And we've got Tom representing government, and we've got Nir representing academia. And my question is for any of them who want to address this question. And that is, how do we make sure that in this longevity field, which arguably is like people claim is going to be the biggest market ever in the history of everything, and going to be like tens of trillions of dollars as soon as it gets off the ground. How do we avoid having sort of hype and technology and people getting rich dominate over maybe what might also be very simple, low-cost measures that can be taken to aid in staving off the diseases of aging, simple low-cost measures like metformin or even carb restriction or caloric restriction, simple measures like just informational measures, like getting people aware that it's almost all old, frail people who are dying of COVID, while my 30-year-old healthy friends cower in their homes because they're so afraid. I mean, it seems like we're missing so much simple stuff that's not part of the multi-trillion-dollar, market that everyone's scrambling after. But there's nothing wrong with scrambling after that market and trying to make advanced technologies like Synalytics and stuff. But how do we make sure that we as a community don't just all jump on these hype things and miss really simple, effective things that can make a huge difference while we wait for the
So can I jump on that? Because I think that's a good example of a market failure. So if you talk to VCs and say, how excited are you about investing in companies that focus on prevention? The answer is, in many cases, is they're not excited about it because of patient churn. So when they talk to health plans, they say, well, if I can only be guaranteed that Allison is going to be with me for 18 months, then if I invest in a prevention program to reduce the risk of diabetes or stroke or heart disease, then there's a good chance that some other health plan is going to capture the benefits of my investment. So I think, one question that I'm interested in is, if we have all of this information about things that would pay for themselves, understanding why it's not happening, because otherwise you're in a situation of of the two economists, and where one says that's a $20 bill on the floor and the other says nonsense. If it were really a $20 bill, someone would have picked it up already. And so, understanding why, if there are all these high impact prevention investments to be made, why aren't they being made, I think is really important.
Sonia?
I think that, like Tom said, we have to address the reasons for why some of these things aren't happening. Like, if even with people who know what they need to do to keep themselves healthy, it's sometimes really hard for them to do it. And doctors, knowing what their patients should do, often look at their patients and say, you know what, you're probably not going to stick to your diet, so I'm going to prescribe you this drug instead. And just understanding that it's a lot of behavioral issues. And aside from the, investors don't want to invest in something that they're not going to get a return on. There's all these sort of behavioral problems that we all deal with. I mean, it's the reason why there's like every January, people are like, they resolve to like eat less, low carb, dry January, whatever. And you do that for a while, and then you get stressed out and you eat a whole bunch of pasta and drink some wine. It's hard. These are hard things. And so that's why we need more, and why what we have doesn't work, and why we're looking for other things. Not to say that you shouldn't still try to be healthy. It's just,
Yeah, hopefully it may not get us all the way. Okay, Lynne, you had your hand up for a while.
Okay, my point was taking back to something we were talking about earlier, about accessing, getting the profile up and accessing government. And I understand why, but most of the conversation's been about the US situation. And I think that there's enough of an international community that we all ought to be working with governments around the world rather than just focusing on the US. And over here, we have been doing quite a bit of work. I put in the chat that the House of Lords, which is the upper house in the UK Parliament, is releasing a report tomorrow on the science of aging. And in that, there are some very strong recommendations for tackling causes of aging rather than individual diseases. It's pushing the whole aging agenda forwards on this. So I just don't make it entirely US based. Think about everywhere else that has the ability to work within the community. And look at how COVID's been tackled differently. So again, I mean, I'm not saying that the UK is any good at this stuff. We've had some disasters with COVID, but one good thing that we have done is right from the outset insisted that any drugs have to go through full, proper, double-blinded clinical trials. So we haven't had the hydroxychloroquine disasters. We've had dexamethasone success. We've had the anti-IL-6 successes, things that have just gone into clinic because they've been shown to work. So there are some models that you can use from other countries that might be beneficial. So let's make it global rather than local.
Yeah, and we're very happy to have you on later as well in the year to do that, hopefully. Sonia, do you want to?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. The US is not necessarily a great model for a lot of things these days. And we shouldn't, I mean, I guess it just happens because we all many of us are in the US, but to the extent where we can get a friendly country, I mean, this is amazing that I didn't know that the UK government was about to come out with a aging report. So that's fantastic. I mean, that's a model. And to the extent that we can learn about those and sort of, use them as models for other countries as well to sort of spread it, that would be great.
Let me just say a word about that, because I've also been in touch with the people who are at the sharp end of the British efforts in this area. And I think one person that I briefly drew the group's attention to a few months ago was Tina Woods, who has led what I think is called the all-party parliamentary group on longevity, and has produced some fantastic reports. It would certainly, I think, Lynn, I imagine you agree, be great to get Tina to give us an in-depth report on what she's been doing and how it's been going.
I absolutely. We're trying to tie that together with the House of Lords report as well. So I'm not allowed to give Tina a copy until tomorrow because there is a formal embargo on it. Apparently, I'll be in contempt of the House of Lords if I released it today. But yeah, I've been working with the APPG for longevity and the House of Lords committee on this, and that there really is a very big drive. And one thing that I think would be useful to this group, Tina brings in an AI background. So she's looking at big data, she's looking at all the issues that we've got in the UK, but I'm sure they're applicable elsewhere, to how we utilize the data we've got. The NHS in the UK has standardized patient records. We've got full birth to death histories, but the problem is accessing them because of different data packages used to collect them, incompatibility between systems, but also a big privacy issue and how we need to actually rethink the use of patient data if we're going to make use of it in the aging context.
Yeah, for that, we are probably going to have a spin-off meeting with Adrian Gropper, who's here on the call, who is working on self-sovereign communities for different types of data structure models. But I just want to check in with you, Sonia. Do you have to hop off at the hour because we're now 3 minutes over?
Yes, unfortunately, I do. I didn't want to say anything, but I do kind of have to go.
Okay. Yes, I just wanted to make sure that that we leave people and out. I would say for those who are still interested to stay on, we still have a few hands up. But Sonia, hey, I can't thank you enough for enabling us to do this. We will have you on again next month when we're going to be discussing the industry blind spots specifically. And up to then, I hopefully have replies from all of you guys to the form that I send out, because then we can review everyone else's answers and hopefully create some membership profiles. But for now, Sonia, thank you so much for enabling us to do this work, hopefully this year. So you can hold us accountable to it for what we're signing up here. But thank you. Thank you.
Well, and thank you. And thanks for everybody for being part of this group. I'm really enjoying it and so happy and honored to be part of it. So so thanks, Allison. Bye.
All right. Bye, Sonia.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, great. So for whoever would like to stay on, I think there were still a few questions that were floating about in the room, and then I would love to open up a gather room so we can all kind of like discuss and socialize a little bit more, informally. So I don't know if you still wanted to discuss a few of the questions here. Joe, I see that you had your hand up too, and we have JJ and Keith. So maybe you want to go out with your questions, and then we can see whether afterwards we move on to the social gather space.
All right, just quickly, I'm questioning how much change we need from regulatory agencies compared to people interested in funding stuff, because I mean, obviously there's an overlap in the form of government funding agencies, but last I checked, there doesn't seem to be a shortage of age-related diseases that we can use as proxies for doing clinical trials to try things out. Whereas instead, getting the funding to try something out in the clinic is much harder. And I think that the more people are able to do this and get positive results on trying out therapies against proxy aging diseases, also the more the general public can hear about that and realize that these are actually affecting fundamental aging aspects. Last I checked, I think even NIRS trial, which is obviously a great triumph of regulatory whispering, it's not even fully funded yet, is it? Is it still basically limited by money? Maybe NIRS still on.
NIRS is going to be now.
I don't know if she's still on, but maybe someone else knows.
Just theft.
So
I probably shouldn't speak for Nir, but I think he's a lot more optimistic now.
Right, but it's still like it's been a fundraising process. Like he's made more regulatory progress than funding progress, I would say, based on what I've heard. So somebody in our community has a fantastic drug that they're target that they've discovered, and there's a drug ready to be tried for it, and there's some proxy aging disease of which there's a list as long as my arm of And then the next question is who's going to plunk down the the $5 or $10 million it takes to try that out.
Can I just pop in with
Please.
one thing on Jay Manick's trial that a lot of you might know about the mTOR inhibitor RTB101 that was really promising in phase 2 and phase 2b, and yet the phase 3 was declared a failure, but not because the drug failed, but because the FDA changed the endpoint for respiratory tract infections in older people from clinically confirmed, as in a lab diagnosis, to self-reported symptoms of respiratory tract infections. And so that just put so much noise in the system that they couldn't get any statistical significance. So Restore Bio is no longer a thing. The drug is sort of dead in the water, even though it's probably an incredibly effective drug. But the FDA didn't know what to do about an endpoint for a large trial in aging. So I think we really do need some more work on regulation and talking to regulators. So NIR's done a fantastic job, but I still don't think they get it. So whoever's got influence with their various regulatory bodies, we've got to try and push it through. The MHRA in the UK just haven't a clue that aging is malleable. They just see it as individual diseases.
Yeah, I remember talking to Lloyd Klickstein about that, who sort of on the medical side designing that trial, and he was feeling bitter about the FDA's choice there. I don't know if that's something that we can just take as a learning and be part of like how we design and get approval for our clinical trials, or I mean, it's kind of a diffuse monster to push against, and that because it's so hard to define exactly what happened there. But if you have a specific idea, I would love to push on it. Anyway, if there's someone, like if we could create a fund or a network of people who could refer to funds, like when an entrepreneur has an actual aging pathway therapy that they want to take out to a clinical trial for some aging proxy disease, if the news could go out to the network and there's some way of sharing the outcome or doing it as an investment or a special purpose vehicle in that particular trial or something like that, that would be pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that's something we talked about in one of the early meetings, which is basically more like a startup advisory board. Like if you have an idea, help you pull it together and organize it and make contacts. And that might be a really good way to enable these things.
Yeah, well, part of the reason why I wanted to do this form that I send out is so that we can kind of like just see what people are good at, what skills they have here, and what people could be advising on. So, one thing that could fall out of that is more like a kind of like members network, but also like a mentorship network a little bit, so that we can maybe already kind of like direct people to people in the network if they have specific questions or if they need advice. And for funding structures, I remember us talking about it, and a few people were apprehensive about it because of potential conflict of interest, and because then this whole group would turn into a very different thing. But I've been looking into it with a few other people in a few different structures, and I'll definitely be open to exploring that further. And don't think it's a bad idea. I think that's a very concrete thing that we could do in this community because many of us are well connected, and yeah, so I think I agree. Is there anything anyone want to react to this point? Otherwise, I'll be moving on with the hands that are raised. Okay, good. Then we have JJ and Keith.
Hi, JJ. So to go back to Lynne's point, in the UK, I'm going to put a link, but it's maybe a lot of you are familiar with it. They have something called the UK Biobank, and like a very good data resource. So UK is quite good at like collecting genomic data and phenotypic data for a very large amount of people. So you can do kind of like data science on that data to kind of map those things together. You can do that without, you don't have to be a UK citizen. You have to be a researcher and you have to pay like a small fee, but anyone can get access to that. The other thing is, the mRNA thing. I almost so long ago, I almost forgot what I was going to say about that. But it's good for like precision medicine, and it could have like an application to longevity. I mean, the vaccine thing is kind of like a use case that was not like the main intention. That was never the main intention of that platform. So it kind of became because of certain features of the platform that make it kind of like quite fast at creating things. So it could be like that's exactly why it could be useful in precision medicine, things like that. There's some technologies that are missing, like the ability to manufacture DNA really quickly, like custom DNA. It's really challenging. There's companies that do that, but it's still kind of expensive. But that's like a platform that could be very useful in this.
Thank you. Yes, please share if you haven't done so. Any reactions to this? Okay, Keith?
Sure. Yeah, I just wanted to note that, we've been talking about earlier, changing sort of the system from the inside, and Tom in particular was very eloquent, so I don't have anything to add on strategies, but I think it's also worth noting that a group like ours might be able to also identify a completely different path, which is another way to change the system, right? Is to just put forth into the world a demonstrable better example of something to force the existing system to change. So there might be things we can do. One example that I'm making some headway on that's not aging related is I was just recently talking to the team from MIT that has created a very interesting audio-based COVID-19 detector based off of earlier Alzheimer's work. And that can be improved. And on the flip side of it, I was talking with certain organizations like, for example, the NBA. They spend hundreds of millions of dollars on the NBA bubble to allow basketball to continue with COVID-19, all these crazy things they're doing to test the players. It could almost all be replaced by literally them just talking to a phone. So things like this might be able to happen. I'm working on it. And if they do, they can become a sensational news story of like, oh crap, like why aren't we doing this kind of stuff everywhere? So this is an example of something that's almost free. If you can just learn to connect the pieces in the right way, that can create something to make everybody go, why aren't we doing this everywhere, right? So there might be analogous things that we can do with aging without, not changing the system from the inside regulatory, but just doing something so obviously better that this everyone puts pressure on the system to go do that instead, right? Just noting that.
Any reactions from anyone in the group? No? Okay. I don't even know if everyone knows about the NBA and NBA thing, but it's totally nuts, I think.
As another clear example, Disneyland and Disney World have been functioning at severely diminished capacity because of this. With a system like that, they might be able to open their doors a lot more, make a lot of money, it becomes a sensational news story. Again, I'm not saying anything is happening. I'm just saying these are some examples of things that could be very clear news stories that would, in that case, make everybody wonder why the government isn't making the manufacturers of phones, have a COVID detector that doesn't require you to share any privacy data. It's just built into your phone and lets you know, hey, you might have COVID, go get checked. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Keith. Okay, is there anyone here on the call who would like to make another comment? All right, good. So what I would really love is if by next time, so we're meeting again next month, but we are going to have a social meeting on Saturday where people from this group, if you're interested, you can meet people from other groups. And so that's the Molecular Machines group, the Intelligent Cooperation group, and our Existential Hope group. So this is one of 4 groups at Foresight. So this will be in a more social online space. And so if people are interested in either, chatting amongst this group or with others, then that's an open invitation to all of you. Also, what I'm hoping to do from the forms that I send out is actually create those member profiles so that we get a little bit more of an idea of who's here and how can we maybe help each other over the long run. And another thing that that program will entail is also more of a kind of like regularly updated opportunities board. So this would be more like a jobs and opportunities board where folks can share either upcoming conferences that they have, but also upcoming job opportunities, or if they're looking for something specific. So let's see if we can, create a little bit more structure around this so that it's not only the meetings as a kind of like communication point, but that there's other touch points as well. And yeah, I welcome all of you to propose to me specific topics that you want to explore. For example, Ravi did that last year, right, where we then had a few kind of like satellite meetings that were specifically focused on exploring individual topics, and we're going to continue them hopefully this year. But if you have specific topics of interest that you want to explore with the group, then I will send out invitations to those to the list if they are aligned. And so we have a monthly touch point, but then hopefully based on your interest, we can have many more meetings than that. And so I'm hoping that we can create a little bit more bottom-up community this year, where all of you get to lead those meetings, and it's not just me trying to imposing a topic on you, but you can actually you can take that much more on your own. Okay, so this is an invitation. Please send me things that you want to discuss with the group of common interest, and I'll be sharing them. And next meeting, which is next month, I will be we'll be quickly talking about the program, but then we'll very quickly dive into the industry bottlenecks that we could be focusing on in the second half of the year. And we're going to have Carl Pfleger, Sonia, and Mike West there. So I'm really excited for that. I'm hoping that I see many of you also on Saturday already. Saturday is this more social event, but yeah, that's all from my end. Is there anything I am missing? No? Okay, great. Well, then I'll see you next month. And yeah, it's really nice to see so many of you again. I'm hoping to see a few of you more in the social context on Saturday.